Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Magic of German Church Records. My name is Catherine Schober, and I am a German to English genealogy translator. So that means that I work with letters, diaries, vital records, and most importantly for this presentation, church records to help people find the details of their ancestors' lives. This presentation is one of my favorites because you can find so much information in your ancestors' church records. So let's go ahead and get started. What we're going to talk about in the presentation today is a few things that you should know before you start that will make working with these records a little bit easier. And then we're going to look at individual records. So we'll look at baptismal records, marriage records, and death records. And I'm going to teach you how you can pull out certain words and find more information based on those individual words so that you don't have to decipher the entire record. And then at the end, we'll do a little quiz to see if you retained what you learned in this presentation, a fun little quiz as a review. So let's jump right in. What should you know before you start working with these records? One, these church records are usually in chronological order. So that means if your ancestor was born in January, you should look for his or her records towards the beginning of the book. If he or she was born in October, say, then you should look more towards the end. And this tip is also going to help us for deciphering certain words, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. The IN ending is also something that comes up a lot in church records. This ending is something that is often seen on the end of last names. And all that means is that your ancestor was a female with that last name. So, to give you a better idea of what I mean, my last name is Schober. If I was written up in a church record, the scribe may have written my name Schober in. And that IN does not mean that I have a different last name than the rest of my male family members. It just means that I am a female with the last name of Schober. So when I'm translating these, I often just take off the IN because it doesn't affect the last name. Just a grammatical marker saying I am a female with the last name of Schober. Now, something else you're going to run into in church records is the old German handwriting, and it looks like this. Now, it's very pretty, but it is a little bit of a different alphabet than we're used to. And a lot of researchers can get overwhelmed when trying to decipher German genealogy documents. Not only are they in a different language, but you have a different script to work with as well. Well, this key is actually from Wikipedia. If you go to Wikipedia and type in current schrift, which is on your handout, you can pull up this key and print it out for yourself. I also wanted to give you a little bit of resources that you can use as handwriting help. This presentation is not about the handwriting, but since the handwriting is a part of church records, I didn't want to leave you high and dry and overwhelmed. So I taught myself to read the handwriting. And some of the books that I used were Edna Benz's If I Can, You Can, Decipher Germanic Records, and Roger Meinert's Deciphering Handwriting in German Documents. Those are great books. They're on your handout. I would highly recommend them if you're going to be working with church records. I myself also wrote a book a few years ago, a little guide about everything I wish I would have known when I was learning the handwriting. So that's tips and tricks of deciphering German handwriting. And then this dictionary, this red dictionary on your screen, is a must have. German to English Genealogical Dictionary. One of my clients recommended it to me a few years ago, and I use it every single day. It's hundreds of pages of the specific German words you'll find in genealogy documents. So definitely recommend that. If you really want to learn the handwriting, I do have an online handwriting course where you can kind of go along and learn with flashcards and things like that. So that's also on your handout. But like I said, we're going to concentrate more on the church records today, but these are some resources to get you started with that handwriting that you'll encounter. So Getting into the presentation itself, I wanted to start off with my number one tip for deciphering church records. So pay close attention. My number one tip is to use the entire page. So I have so many clients who will crop out their ancestor's record and just send me that little snippet of the church record page. But I'll always write back and say, thank you, but could you please send me the entire page that the record is on? Why? Well, one, it gives me more of a handwriting sample of that particular scribe's handwriting. So that handwriting can be challenging, but the more sample you have of how a particular person wrote, the easier it gets to decipher. Another thing you can do if you have the entire page is to compare the formatting. So, what do I mean by that? Usually, church records were written in the same format as one another. So the entry above would likely be the same format of information as the entry below. So, for example, let's say your ancestor's record is here, number 51. You're ready to start deciphering. You have your nice little Wikipedia key, and you get to the first word. And that word looks kind of hard to read. So, what can you do? Go to the record above or below and look at the first word there. Chances are that the first word on your record will be the same category of word as the first word on another person's record. So, is it a town? Is it a name? Is it a month? Is it an occupation? Knowing the category of the word really limits the possibilities of what that handwriting can be. So, if you know what category to expect, you're already on the right track to deciphering that word easier. So let's look at this record in 52. We look at the first word there, and that looks a little easier to read than this word above. So we decipher it, and it says M-A-I, my, which if you speak German, or maybe if you don't, it kind of sounds similar to our English word. My is May in English. So we know we're looking at a month. So that narrows down our list of possibilities from hundreds to 12. But then we remember church records were written in chronological order. If the word below is May and church records were written chronologically, that means the record before, if it's a different month, would either be January, February, March, or April. So now we've narrowed it down from hundreds or thousands of possibilities to 4. And looking at this word, we can decipher it as April. So definitely use the entire page, print the entire page out, download the entire page, even multiple pages if you can. The more samples you have, the better. Now, German is a very logical language, and that means they compound words. So they put a lot of words together to make a longer word. And this can actually help us in genealogy. To give you an example of what I mean, the word stink in German plus the word Tier literally translates as stinky animal. And that is the German word for a skunk. Or you can have the word Hand plus the word shoe, literally translates as hand shoe. A shoe for your hands in German is the word for gloves. So German is made up of a lot of root words, and we're going to use these root words to help us decipher things on church records. All right, so we got all the basics covered for starting off, and now we're going to dive into the individual records so you can learn what words you need to look for to extract that information and not decipher every single thing on the page. So first, I want to make you aware of the root word of tauf. Anytime you see the root word tauf, so T-A-U-F in a word as a root word, that's going to be something to do with a baptism, okay? So on baptismal records, what kind of information are we looking for? We're going to be looking for the child's name, the dates of birth and baptism, the parents' names and occupations, towns of residence, and then the godparents and sponsors' names. And of course, from parish to parish, you may get slightly more or slightly less information, but as a general idea, this is the type of information that you can find. So lots of good stuff. So church records are written in either column or paragraph form. For baptismal records, we'll start off with that column format as it's a little bit easier. So this is one of the first columns on a baptismal record. And a lot of times these column headings are written in a kind of printed text. And that printed Gothic looking text is called fraktur. So this alphabet key you can find it online. I provided a link to the key on your handout. It's not too hard. It's not like the handwriting where it feels a little overwhelming, but it is slightly different. But with that key, and after you've worked with it a few times, you'll be good to go. So the columns can be written in fraktur. And this first column we have here is Monat und Tag, month and day. So what are we going to be looking for in the month and day column? A date, likely the dates of the birth and baptism. So we scan the column until we see a number. And here we have the number 17. So sometimes in German, the ones can look like I's, not always, but sometimes, and their sevens will be crossed. So just to give you a heads up about numbers. So we have the number 17. Now we look for the month, and our month is November. And remember, if you couldn't decipher that month, use your record above and below to see if you can read the month there and narrow it down. So we have November the 17th. Now, which do you think came first, the birth or the baptism? Most likely the birth. So that since that's our first number listed, that's going to be usually our birth. So we have November 17th for the birth, and then we keep looking for the next number, and we see a 5. So the number 5. Now, a lot of times in German genealogy, the baptism was pretty close after the birth. Of course, you can never say always, things varied from parish to parish, but in most of the records I translate, the baptism happened pretty quickly, same day or a few days later after the birth. So December 5th would seem pretty far off to me. Of course, it could happen, but generally pretty far off. So what else could that number be? That's going to be our time. These Germans were very meticulous and often wrote down exactly what time our ancestors were born. And if you didn't know for sure that that was the time, you could use these two clue words, which means at, and which means a clock. So here we have it, and which means a clock. And those are going to be, they're going to surround our time. So here we go, at 5 o'clock. So that's the kind of a 2 words you can look for in the script. You can memorize how they look, and that will be your time. And there they are there. Now the Germans get even more meticulous and give us the exact time of day. Was it in the Früh, so the morning, at noon, Mittag, in the afternoon, Nachmittag, Abend, evening, or night, Nacht? So how can you tell which one of these are? Well, looking at this word and the 6 possibilities it could be, you see 2 dots here, that's the German umlaut, and only one of these 6 possibilities has the umlaut. So knowing that it can be one of these 6 words will help you to figure out what that word after the time is. So this one is früh, or in the morning. However, if you're not sure what these words or any word could look like in the script, there is a great website to help us out. It's called the Schrift Generator, and it's on our handout. Here it is. So let's say you wanted to type in früh. Type it in here, and you get what the word looks like in the old German script. And you can change the script to most match the type of handwriting on your document. You can do Morgan and see what those words should look like. So that's a great way to kind of type in the German word that you think might be on the page and see if it matches up with your handwritten word. All right, then we keep scrolling through that document and we find another number. This number is half 11. So in German, half 11 means 10:30. So half before the number that it actually says. So half 11 is 10:30. There's no other number listed. So we can then assume that 10:30 was the time, we can see our and our or, that the baby was baptized. With no other date, that 10:30 would be the same day. So from picking out those words, we have that the child was born November 17th, 5 o'clock in the morning, and then there was just one other number there, a time, so baptized the same day. So ready to move on to the next column. And this is another root word that I want you to be aware of. That root word is the word Ort. And Ort is the root word for town or place. So if you see Ortschaft, Wohnort, or Ort by itself, these are all going to be words symbolizing where your ancestor lived. So our ancestor here lived in the town of Neumarkt. Now, if for some reason you couldn't read this town, which of course happens from time to time, you can go to Myers Gazetteer, which is a wonderful website. If you're not aware of it, it's on your handout, and it's a collection of hundreds of thousands of towns in pre-World War I Germany. And the best thing with Myers Gazetteer is you can use a wildcard feature. I'll take you over here and show you, to represent the letters that you can't read. So let's say you recognized NEU, put a wildcard feature for those complicated letters in the middle, and then you got the K and the T at the end. Hit enter, and it gives you a list of the possibilities of what your word can be. Now, this is a pretty short list, but sometimes you might get a longer list with hundreds of possibilities. In that case, you can narrow it down by choosing the state where your ancestor's record comes from. And that narrows it down to 3. So definitely take advantage of the Myers Gazetteer wildcard feature when trying to decipher towns. I do it all the time. All right, moving through the columns, we're making headway. Our next column would be Name, which luckily is very close to English. It is the same spelling. Name. So the name of our child is going to be here, and her name is Anna Maria. Now, most columns will have little narrow columns here. And in those narrow columns, they usually have similar information to one another across churches. So you're going to be looking for, in those narrow columns, the religion, the gender, so this is Geschlecht, legitimacy, were they legitimate or illegitimate? And all of these words, I forgot to mention, are on your handout. So I provided you with a list of common German vocabulary words that you will find in church records, so it becomes a lot easier when you're trying to decipher them. So in these narrow columns, look for religion, gender, and legitimacy. And they'll have a little 1 or a little mark showing that they were part of that category. So our child was Catholic, female, and legitimate. Moving on, we have the parents. Now here, I did want to make you aware of an old-fashioned spelling. So this is the word for Eltern, parents, and normally you'll see it spelled like this with an E, but as you go more into the past, you may see an old-fashioned A in front of it. So either one, same word. So we have the father and the mother, father, mother. And we likely know the father's last name because that's probably how we located the record itself. So here our father's name is Weinmüller. But maybe we don't know the mother's name, her maiden name. So we go to her column. Her name is Theresia. And then we look for the clue word geboren. So geboren, or GEB as an abbreviation, is the word for nay. So you're going to find this word before the mother's maiden name. So there we have it. So if you can again type that word into your script generator, that website I showed you first, and see what geboren should look like in the script. Once you have that, find it in the actual text, look after it, and that will be your mother's maiden name. So her name is Alton Gruber, and she has that IN ending at the end of her name, symbolizing that she is a female with the last name of Alton Gruber. Then you might get the father's occupation. You can look directly after his name or before his name, but usually the occupation will be pretty close to the name itself. And he was a Tischler, Meister, more of those German root words. So Meister means master, and Tischler is carpenter. So he was a master carpenter. And then I wanted to give you some clue words that will help you find the town where your father or mother might have come from, if it is different from where they currently live. So it seems like, based on this record, they currently live in that town of Neumarkt that we looked up on Meyer's Gazetteer, but the mother comes from somewhere different. And you can find the town by looking for the prepositions in, aus, von, or zu. In, aus, von, or zu. All of these words in German are ways to say from. They're slightly different, but we don't need to get into their slightly different meanings. For our purposes today, they can mean from. So if you see one of these words, look for the town after. And again, you can look up what these words look like in that script generator website. So here we have the word von, which is one of our 4 town clue words. And after it is her town where she came from, Weizenkirchen. So in, aus, von, or zu are the town words you want to look for. And then finishing up the last column is going to be usually the godparents or the sponsors. And that word you can look for is Paten or Gevatter. Remember, all of these words are on your handout. Now you may be noticing this word up here is longer than this word down here. Very observant. This H, this is an H, is an old-fashioned spelling that comes up a lot. So if you see an H in your word and you can't find what that word means in the dictionary, try taking the H out because it very likely could be an old-fashioned spelling. So H represents old-fashioned spelling sometimes. And if you can't find your word in the dictionary with an H, take it out. They do, of course, still use H's today in German, but they use them a lot more in the past. And then for the godparents, we'll usually get the name and the occupation. So the occupation could be represented by the column heading Stand, Beruf, or Gewerbe. And again, all these words are on your handout. And these are 3 words that you might see representing the column for occupation. And it turns out our godparent is Maria, and she was a farmer. So we did it just from knowing the specific things to look for in records. We found the child's name was Anna Maria. We found her dates of birth and baptism by knowing what numbers to look for. We found her parents' names and occupations. We found the town of residence, and we used Meyer's Gazetteer to help us fill in the blanks for any missing letters. And then we found the godparents' and sponsors' names. So congratulations, we made it for our first record. You're ready to go with baptismal records. So let's move on to marriage records. These are great, probably the most information because you get 2 lines worth of information in marriage records. So on records for marriage, you can look for the date of marriage, names of the bride and groom, occupations of the bride and groom, their parents' names, so a whole another line back, parents' occupations, and then the legitimacy, were the bride and groom legitimate or illegitimate when they were born. So sometimes records look like this, and you may think, why, Germans, why? As if it's not bad enough that they're in German, like I said, they're in this handwriting, and then sometimes they're not divided into those nice columns that separates the text from one another. But Again, if you know where to look, you can pull out the information you need and not have to decipher every word. So I'll walk you through it now. So the very first line on these records is almost always going to be your date. So what you want to look for first is the month. Now on your handout, I have a link to the Family Search German genealogical word list. And on that link, you can find a list of the month words in German. You can then type those words, so January, February, March, etc., into the script generator to see what they should look like in the text and then look for that word. Here, we find the month of Dezember or December. Now, in German, the dates are written day, month, year. So that means before our month is going to be the date. And here we have 16, which is 16th. All right. And then after that, we're going to look for the year. And the year will usually be written out in words. So here we have the 16th of December, 1833. So first line, look for your month and then the rest of your date. Now we want to look for the names of our bride and groom. And usually on church records, that will be in the margin. So a nice little clue word to look in the margins for your names. So here we have the names Xaver Erhardt and Maria Anna Weber. And what I want you to do here is to study those names very carefully. Look for any characters that may jump out at you. So maybe this X right here with that line through it, that's something that you can look for. Or this W here with this long line below the line of writing. Look for how these names are written. And then I want you to look in the text itself and see if you can match them up. So for example, we have our X here. And there's another one. So we found a match to his name in the margin. Again, we have our W here. And again, we see that crazy looking W letter there. Maria Anna Weber is a match to Maria Anna Weber. So use your margin names, study them, and find their equivalent in the text. Underline them because in the actual paragraph, because then we're going to build off those names to find their parents' names, the next line back. So we underlined our groom's name, for example. And the next thing we want to look for is a very important word in German genealogy. And that word is des, D-E-S. And it will look like that in the script. So memorize that, type it in your script generator if you need to. Make sure the script generator actually is great, but the one thing it doesn't do is type the S's at the end of the words correctly. There's actually 3 different ways to write an S in German in the handwriting. So make sure when you're looking for des, your S should look like this number 6 looking S, D-E-S. So look for your des, and des means of the. And what it's implying here is the son of the, which means we're going to be looking for the father's name. So we scroll, we scan the line here until we get to a name, and it looks like the son is named after his father, Xaver Erhardt, same name, son and father. We then want to keep looking until we see a female name, and here we have the name Apollonia Schmidt. So des is going to be of the, and that des is a clue word that the parents' names will follow. Now, another phrase I want to make you aware of is the phrase ehelicher Sohn. That phrase means legitimate son. So what this little section says here is Xaver Erhardt of the Xaver Erhardt and Apollonia Schmidt's legitimate son. That sounds a little weird in English. When I would translate it, I would say Xaver Erhardt, legitimate son of Xaver Erhardt and Apollonia Schmidt. Now, in German, in this old kind of German writing, this phrase, legitimate son, can either go at the very end of the sentence, like it is here, or you might also get it before the des. So that's kind of how we would say it in English. Xaver Earhart, legitimate son of. So it's a little complicated German grammar, but I want you to be aware of this legitimate son can go right before the des or at the very end of the phrase. Okay? Look for your des, and then you'll find the parents' names. Now, you may have noticed that I skipped all of this information before the father's names. You can skip it if you're just trying to get names and dates. You don't have to read all that extra information. But if you want to get every last detail out of the record possible, this is where you'll want to look. So, in this case, all the information regarding the parents is before the name. Sometimes you'll get the name right after the des and all this information a little bit after. So it might flip flop, but either way, you're going to look for your des, look for your father's name, and that extra stuff will be either before or after. So here it's before. So we have the father's name, the mother's name, and lots of extra words. So like I said, don't worry about them if you're overwhelmed. That's extra information on the parents. But if you want all the detail, this is where it is. So what it says here, I'm not going to make you decipher all of it. I'll just tell you what it says, is that he is the verstorbenen Schullehrer von Erlach, and she is the noch lebenden. So that means he is the late school teacher from, remember that von was one of our words in aus, von, or zu. Here it is in the writing that shows the town is coming. So he is from the town of Erlach. And then she is noch lebend, or still alive, still living. So again, look for your des. That's going to be of, signifies the parents' names are coming, and then find the parents' names. And then all that extra information, either directly before or directly after the name, will be more information about your parents. Now, let's say you do want to know that extra information. So you get your key out and you're ready to start deciphering. With the handwriting, some letters are, of course, easier to read than others. And that's where I play hangman with myself. I'll write down the letters that I recognize, and I'll leave a blank for the letters that I don't, because that helps my brain to kind of see the word as a whole and automatically fill in the blanks. So here, I bet your brain can say, oh, yes, I recognize that. That's church record. But what if you don't speak German? How would you do that in German? That's where this wonderful, wonderful website comes in, one of my favorites, and it's called wordmine.info. You can pick your language here. So if you're researching a different language line, you can still use this website for any of these languages. We'll stick with German today. And then either choose words that start with or words ending in for depending on where most of the letters that you recognize are. So we'll do words ending in, do an asterisk for the letters that we couldn't recognize, and type in the letters that we did. Very suspenseful. There we go. So it gives us 10 possible words that our handwritten word might be. What you can then do is narrow it down by the number of letters in your words. And I always like to do one more and one less than I actually count, just to give myself some wiggle room if I didn't read a letter correctly. And it popped up one word that it could be. That word is Geburt, which means birth, which would make sense in my genealogical document. So definitely take advantage of this website if you can't read all the letters and the words. It's very helpful for filling in the blanks. So just from knowing which words to look for, we took this entire paragraph, found the dates in the first line. We used the column to find the bride and the groom's names in the text. We matched them up with their column equivalent. And then we underlined those and found the des, the of the, and scanned after the des until we found the parents' names. And then we looked for that extra information surrounding their names and found out that he was a school teacher and deceased and that she was still alive. So great job. From that entire paragraph record, you were able to pull out that information. So the hardest one is complete. And moving on to our final one, death records. Also great records for finding information on your ancestor. So in death records, you can find the name and the occupation of the deceased, usually their date, time, and place of death, often their date, time, and place of the burial or the funeral, place of birth, how old they were when they died. A lot of times you can get the cause of death, which is interesting. And then sometimes you'll get a little more information as well, again, depending on what church you're in, what parish you're looking for. But those are the general things you'll want to look for. So for this record, I'll take you back to the column format. I'll only make you do one paragraph format for today. So in a death record, column format, you may see the first column looking like this. Jahr, Monat und Tag. If you remember, Monat und Tag is month and day. We talked about that in our birth record. And Jahr means year. So again, we're going to be looking for dates, for numbers. So here we see 24th of March and 26th of March. Now, which do you think came first, the death or the burial? Hopefully the death. So our death is going to be the March 24th. And our burial is going to be March 26th. So again, using some common sense will help you with these records too, meaning that you don't have to decipher every single word. Our next column is going to be an important one, the Verstorbene. If you remember from our marriage record, our father was verstorben, deceased. So this is going to be our deceased column, the name of the person who died. And we find that name right away, first name on the page, on the column, and that is Maria Riegeltalner. That name is likely how you found the record itself. You likely have already learned to recognize this name because you found her individual record. So now we want to know, was Maria the daughter of somebody, the wife of somebody, or the widow of somebody? So if we're looking for that of, who remembers what word we're looking for? That's going to be our DES. Our DES is going to be our clue to find the relationships to whom she is related, the people to whom she is related. So we look for our DES. We scan after for a name, and look at this, Riegeltalner, Riegeltalner. This time, our name is directly after the DES. So his name is Anselm Riegeltalner. Now, is he her father or her husband? We want to look for a phrase that will show us that. And this time, the phrase is before the des. The eheliche Tochter, this EHL, is an abbreviation for the word ehelich, which means legitimate. So remember I said in that marriage record, this phrase, legitimate daughter, can either go right before the des or all the way at the end of the phrase. In our marriage record, it was here at the end of the phrase, but in this death record, it's here before the des. So what this says is Maria Riegeltalner, legitimate daughter of Anselm Riegeltalner. So we have her father's name. If we have her father's name, chances are that we can find her mother's names as well. So we keep scrolling until we see, we keep scanning until we see a female name. And here we find it, Rosalia. Now, if you don't think that you can find, differentiate a female name from all of these other words in the text, no problem. What I want you to do is look for that clue word, geboren. Remember, our geboren was our clue word for ne, meaning that the mother's maiden name is coming up. So type in that word geboren in your script generator, see what it should look like, match it up with the word in the text, and then look before for her first name and after for her maiden name. And our mother is Rosalia geboren Hakel. So again, just by knowing what to look for, using that des, you found the parents' names. Now here we have another column, and look at that word, ort. Who remembers what ort means, our root word ort? That's going to be our town. So this is where she lived. And then in these little narrow columns, remember we had those narrow columns on our birth record? Here on a death record, there'll often be marital status, religion, and gender and age. Again, it might vary from parish to parish, but this is the type of information you can find in those narrow columns. And it looks like our Maria was only 9 months old and fortunately unmarried. She wasn't married yet at the age of 9 months. But these are the things you can look for. Vocabulary words for these are on your handout. And then finishing up, we have another ort. Ort is going to be town. And then this is the town of burial. Beerdigung is burial or funeral. And then we have the word Krankheit, which means illness. So how did she die? Or this column has Todesart as well, which is the type, art, of death, Tod. That's another one of our German compound words. Type is art and death is Tod. So type of death, and she died of a Lungenlähmung, which is a pulmonary embolism. And then our final column in a lot of these records actually will sometimes be the comments. So are there any extra things that the scribe wanted to say about this person? I've translated death records where a person actually worked for the church. So in this column, this Anmerkung column, it said that the church rang the bells for him 12 times as a symbol of respect for his work at the church. So sometimes you can get really good information that gives you more insight into the life of your ancestor in this extra column. So Anmerkung is the word for comment. Sometimes you'll see the word Bemerkung also means comment. So again, just by knowing what to look for and what those columns mean, we found her name, we found out when she died and when she was buried. And this is the local cemetery. That was a little extra information if you want to keep deciphering. We found her father's name by looking for that des, that DES. And then we kept looking and found her mother's name by using that geboren word. And then her cause of death was a pulmonary embolism. So we did it. Congratulations. You made it through birth, marriage, and death. So promised you there'd be a little quiz at the end. So let's see how well you listened. What does an IN mean at the end of a last name? If you said female, Schober in, female with the last name of Schober, you are correct. Which letter of the alphabet is in some words of the past, but not as often in the modern German version today? Think of that baptismal record with the godparents. If you said H, you are correct. So if your word doesn't make sense with an H in it, if you can't find it in a dictionary, take out the H, could be an old-fashioned spelling. Which word means of or of the and signifies that the father's name or the husband's name or some other relationship is coming up? Des, great important word in church records, will help you to find the relationships. Which root word signifies a town? Orts, remember it can be Orts, Ortschaft, Wohnort. If you have Ort in your column, that's going to be a town. And then finally, what is the number one tip for deciphering church records? What did I say at the very beginning that I always tell all my clients to do? Use that entire page. You want to be able to compare records with one another. You want to be able to have a huge handwriting sample so that you have a lot of options to compare words. So definitely, definitely, definitely print out, download that entire page and even multiple pages if you can. If you want more help as you go along, I actually have written an entire book that was based on this presentation. It's called The Magic of German Church Records, Finding the Key to Your Ancestors' Past. And it talks about the things we talked about today in a lot more detail. It really expands on everything, walks you through, has sample records for you to work with. So if you're feeling like you want a little bit more help, the book is on the handout as well. But I think that you're going to be able to do it. Remember that everything that we talked about today. Remember all those clue words, remember all those processes we talked about, and you'll be able to extract your ancestors' information from German church records. And most importantly, have fun. It's like a puzzle and it's really fun, and you'll feel really proud of yourself once you find your ancestors' information in these wonderful records. So thank you for listening and good luck with your future research.